Welcome, Changelings. Tova here. Today, I want to talk a little bit about centering practices, grounding practices, and practices around creating what you can kind of think of as energetic boundaries. I say energetic because it's more of a way of thinking about it than I don't know if it's actual, like if we think about our energy or the energy of a space or the energy of something, it's not like a really tangible concept. At least I don't think of it that way. So for lack of a better way of thinking about it, I just think of it as like protecting our energy, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So these are practices that can really be helpful and supportive in a variety of different contexts, but I will leave that up to you to determine if and when these might be helpful for you. I'm just sharing some information that that might be helpful, or it might not. Do with it what you think would best serve you in your own specific situation. So I'll also share my perspective as well, of course. I like to think of these as regular practices that I do consistently over time, rather than things that I turn to only occasionally or only when I need them in a certain moment. With that said, though, if there is a time when I am feeling extra overwhelmed or extra anxious, I might do an extra practice. But the point is that I'm not waiting until I feel a particular way to practice these. I simply make them a part of my lifestyle. So another good example is like I do improv. And so sometimes on the day of an improv class or an improv show, I might throw in an extra grounding or centering practice just to really kind of help me like clear out any residual like emotions or thoughts, and just so that helps me to become more present when I'm on stage or in class. Just in general, feeling grounded and centered helps me to find an inner sense of stability. And so I find that really helpful, not only with emotion regulation, but also in facilitating a deepened inner connection with myself, my values, and my deeper intentions in life. And that's really important because sometimes we can be distracted by what you might think of as like surface level thoughts and emotions, mistaking them to be the truth. Sometimes those thoughts and emotions, particularly if things are uncomfortable, might want us to avoid. But sometimes going into that discomfort and just being with what's uncomfortable can actually really serve us in the long term. It's a really personal distinction that, again, is really kind of each of our own inner work to find out what's meaningful for us, and how we want to be and act and what we want to do in any given moment. But just having an awareness that there's always a choice can be really helpful. So it's helpful for that. Also, if we just have this sense of feeling like scattered, if a lot is going on in our lives and we feel pulled in a bunch of different directions, finding practices and ways of centering and grounding can be really helpful. And I know that when I am more grounded and centered, I'm better able to then make choices that are really more aligned on a deep soul level. And so that can be a really important reason to make these practices just part of our daily lives, is it really helps us to get super clear on what our intentions are, what we want, and to be able to act from that place of kind of like an inner knowing, developing our own intuition and our own kind of inner compass, I guess, and being able to really hear that, because it can get so covered up, with like all the other things that we are dealing with and grappling with, just kind of again on that surface level. And this kind of helps to really go within. So it's also really helpful if we are in what is thought of as a liminal space in our lives. So finding ways to center and ground ourselves can help us to sit with the uncertainty that liminality is. Essentially, a liminal space is a time of transition and change. So when things are just uncertain, it can be really uncomfortable. And oftentimes we are pulled to do something about it, to fix it, to get rid of it, to avoid it. But when we can be more centered and more grounded, it can really expand our capacity to sit with and hold that uncertainty. if it's there, rather than rushing to get rid of it, and maybe I don't want to say doing something that we would regret, but just being in a space that is unknown. So thinking about energetic boundaries that I was talking about earlier, that helps me to stay focused on what are my reactions, my emotions, my wants, my needs. So kind of a metaphor to think about energetic boundaries is like coffee in a thermos. So I am the coffee in a thermos trying to maintain my temperature, and the energetic boundary of the thermos keeps out all the other stuff. It just hits that boundary and deflects, hits the boundary and deflects. And having an energetic boundary kind of gives some space between our inner experience and everything that's happening around us. Almost like a shield in a way. So I just want to give you some ideas for centering and grounding and energetic boundary practices. I'm not going to go too into detail in this video on these. It's just a concept that I want to introduce. If there's any that are particularly of interest to you, you can Google about it, do your own research, and like I said, find ways that it fits for you or not at all. So I'm just going to share 10, and these are just kind of a mix of the centering, grounding, and energetic boundaries. I feel like there can also be a lot of overlap between these practices. It's like a centering practice can also be grounding. A grounding practice can also be centering. So they're just 10 of them. So one is meditation. So I personally find meditations to be really helpful for me in centering myself. There are a lot of different meditations out there. I personally don't find all of them useful. It's kind of like a personal journey of finding what's going to work for you and what doesn't. I currently use an app that has some different types and styles of meditations, but one that I consistently find useful is a body scan. Another practice is going for a walk in nature, just being in nature. I have done a a whole health card deck about nature and why it's really beneficial. Doing some yoga or stretching. Again, thinking in an embodied way, working with the physical body to affect our mind. There's a whole field about this called embodied cognition. A grounding visualization in which you visualize like a grounding cord that is connecting you and anchoring you to the earth. Mindfully taking care of your environment, like just through household chores, like washing dishes, organizing something, watering plants, and just really focusing on being present to what it is that you're doing. Also, sometimes household tasks can be repetitive, and it kind of gets you into like this kind of mindful like flow state when you're doing it. Practicing long, slow, deep belly breathing, where we're really expanding our belly, slowing down the pace of our breathing. Visualizing a protection bubble. It can literally be a bubble. It might be a white light or a crystal ball that's really kind of surrounding you and is actually forming an actual barrier or boundary between you and everything else. Just being mindful of objects in your environment. So especially if we're caught up in our heads, and just really have this inner focus, directing that focus and then awareness outside of us. So maybe naming, 3 or 5 things that are in your environment, objects, and noting, their color, their shape, their texture, their size, and just, really focusing on the details about them. Some objects that can be really helpful with this are like crystals. Crystals have a lot of complexity to them. Like a stone has a crystal as well. There's like a really tactile element to it. A plant, or even some art or a picture of some kind. But there are many different types of ways that you can do that practice. And kind of going along with that is actually having some objects that are accessible to you in your spaces. So these are objects, and they should have like interesting colors about them, textures, scents, maybe some aromatherapy, little aromatherapy scents, or sounds. So maybe like I've heard tuning forks can be really helpful. I have a tuning fork as well. I don't use it maybe as much as I should. or even just listening to the sounds that are in your environment. So the last practice is engaging in a small organizational task or doing a puzzle. And the idea with that is that it's really kind of engaging our mind. So if we're thinking about organizing things and being really logical and orderly about that, or doing a puzzle and solving a problem, it would be difficult to also be engaged in kind of rumination and overthinking and those other mental behaviors. So I hope this was helpful. If you have any centering or grounding or energetic boundary practices that are helpful for you that I didn't name, please share them in the comments. If you made it this far, please drop a unicorn emoji in the comments, and I will see you next time.